On August 9th and 10th of 1969, a series of brutal murders took place in LA.
2 of the bodies were found inside the house, 1 in the vehicle, and 2 on the front lawn.
When police arrived, they found the telephones and electricity lines cut. The bodies had been dead about 12 hours. One officer summed up the murders when he said, "In all my years, I have never seen anything like this before."
Actress Sharon Tate, who is married to director Roman Polanski and 8 months pregnant, was one of the victims. You might remember seeing her story fictionalized by Quentin Tarantino in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
While the police admitted they had no suspects in the Bel Air massacre, there were 2 more murders 15 miles away in the Silver Lake section of Los Angeles. Market owner Leo LaBianca and his wife Rosemary were found by their children stabbed and mutilated.
Members of the Manson family, a kind of cult who were living in a place called Spahn Ranch, were found guilty for the crimes. Manson and 4 of his followers were convicted of first-degree murder. The prosecutor at the time said that Manson wanted to start a race war and trigger the end of the world. For decades, that is how the story went. But a new film by legendary documentary filmmaker Errol Morris asks you to reconsider that. It's inspired by a book called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s by journalist Tom O'Neill. In it, O'Neill makes a case that Charles Manson might have been connected to one of the CIA's secret programs from the Cold War era, MKUltra, a program that tried to figure out methods of mind control and did so by performing experiments on patients using psychedelic drugs and sensory deprivation techniques. I spoke to Errol Morris about his latest film, Chaos, The Manson Murders, which is out on Netflix now. Mr. Morris, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Such a treat for us. I'm a big fan of your work. Tom O'Neill's book makes a very different case than what people typically know about Charles Manson. The narrative that he compelled his drug-fueled followers to brutally murder 7 people to start a race war, right? The theory was popularized by Helter Skelter, the best-selling book by the prosecutor on Manson's case. And what did you find compelling about O'Neill's theory? What propelled you to make a film about it?
I wouldn't say that Tom O'Neill has one theory. He had one goal, but many theories.
Fair.
And one goal was to discredit the argument that had been made by the prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, in his best-selling book, Helter Skelter. The Beatles' White Album, the race war theory, the bottomless pit.
In Manson's mind, the term helter-skelter meant the black man rising up against the white establishment and murdering the entire white race, with the exception of him and his followers, who intended to escape from helter-skelter by going to the desert and living in the bottomless pit. At least that's what he told his family. He got much of this from Revelation 9, which is the last book in the New Testament. He got some of his other philosophies from the Beatles.
And on and on and on and on. It reminds us that Bugliosi had a job to do. He needed to secure not just convictions, but death sentences for Charles Manson and many members of his cult, the family. And in order to do that, he needed to link Manson with all of the crimes, even though for many of them, Manson wasn't there. How do you get a death sentence? How do you get a conviction for somebody who has committed a crime but wasn't at the crime scene itself?
Mm-hmm.
A tall order. And ultimately, Bugliosi was successful. He got death sentences for virtually everybody. The only problem is that his theory of the case may have been convincing as storytelling to a jury, but might not be true.
And what was it that that made you think that it might not be true?
The whole Bugliosi argument always struck me as being far-fetched. And Tom O'Neill asks a fundamental question about this case. How is this man, Charles Manson, able to convince people to kill?
And to do so with no remorse, and to do so easily, right? I wonder if we could go through, for people who might not have yet seen your film, and they should, some of the different elements of.
Tell everybody to see it.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. I watched it last night. First of all, the film walks us through how Manson was very much known to police before the murders. And I wonder if you could just tell me what kind of history he had with the police and why that was surprising.
He had been in a whole number of prisons, spent most of his life in prison. In fact, he often argued that he was better off in prison. He rather enjoyed being in prison and was happy to go back to prison. Once the death sentence had been lifted by various court decisions, he spent really the rest of his life in prison. One question that Tom O'Neill keeps asking, after Manson got out, he committed one parole violation after another, a whole succession of parole violations that should have landed him back in prison, but didn't. The parole officer just let him go, essentially let him go to commit crimes, more and more serious crimes. Why? What was that about?
And just what's the implication there? That he was let to rip?
The implication, the inference that you're supposed to make, I'm not sure that I make that same inference, but the inference that Tom O'Neill wants you to make is that the government was behind all of this. That this ultra secret program, MK Ultra, had programmed Manson.
There were these research scientists who were working secretly for the government.
One of the most bizarre episodes in CIA history.
Planting false memories in people without their awareness.
That he was a product of some kind of government conspiracy to implant false memories, to program human behavior, to create a Manchurian candidate, someone programmed to kill.
Yeah. Am I fair to say also gave him the skills to convince his followers to do the same?
You can add that to it.
One way O'Neill tries to make that case is Manson's parole officer, the guy that just lets him off on all of these violations. He has an office at a clinic in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco where Manson and members of his family went to regularly. And around that time, there was also this scientist, right, Louis Jolly West, who was also hanging out at this clinic and was studying mind control. And can you just tell me a little bit about this part of it?
Well, Jolly West becomes this pivotal figure because we know, in good measure because of research done by Tom O'Neill, that he was working for the CIA and he was involved with MK Ultra research. It's really an interesting thing about history in general. And certainly in investigating any kind of a crime, I was a private detective for years, by the way. You're depending on oral testimony, written records, and so on and so forth. But what if all those written records are destroyed? And the enormous difficulty, I made a whole movie involving MK Ultra for Netflix called Wormwood. What if the CIA and MK Ultra go to unusual lengths to destroy all records of what they had done and who they were? What if they tried to obliterate their own existence? Like lifting up a magic slate and everything becomes erased. So Tom O'Neill's ultimate problem is, how do you make these connections stick?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the suggestion of this and that. You have Jolly West's presence at the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, but no record of any kind of interaction with Charles Manson himself.
Right. He can never put them in the same room together.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Tantalizing, but somehow not quite within his grasp.
Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about LSD and psychoactive drugs, and how of course they played a big role in MK Ultra, but another argument O'Neill's putting forward here is the fact that LSD was commonly used by Manson family members as well, right? It's like just another similarity between the CIA program and what was going on Spawn Ranch.
But of course, a lot of people are using hallucinogens of all kinds of drugs of one kind or another.
Good point. Yeah.
And I've thought a lot over the years about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy is hopeful. It's hopeful because it tells us there's a rhyme and reason to things. This is weird, but it happened because people programmed it to happen. People conspired to make it happen. It's part of a plan, a program, a plot. In the Manson case, we have so many actors, so many various people, prosecutors, lawyers, criminal defendants, and on and on and on and on. When you think of the just sheer volume of material that has been written about this case over the years. Have I read all of it? I haven't. There's just too much of it. It's just immense. But to learn about Bugliosi, I think it's one of the great virtues of Tom's book, is it's the portrait of a crazy person. Bugliosi was kind of out of his mind. And although he was successful in winning the case and in creating this bestseller, a book that sold literally millions of copies, the theory that he had for why Manson did what he did, I don't think holds water.
And just for our listeners, why does that theory not hold water?
It's not clear that Manson, although maybe he believed in a possible race war, that was the primary motivation for what he did. I suppose if I had to pick a reason, and also we like to think that there is one unitary reason that we can muster, say, oh, it all happened because of this, or it all happened because of that. Another great candidate is his failed music career.
I played music with Charlie and tried to help him get a recording contract. I was friends with Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, Greg Jacobson, Dennis Wilson, and I were interested in getting Charlie to settle down, come into a studio, just him and his guitar, play and sing his songs.
There's a time for living. The time keeps on flying.
This film, Chaos, is littered with a lot of Manson music, which I confess to rather liking.
Look at your game, girl.
A lot of it I just never heard before, and I think this is one of the first times It's really used extensively. You want to hear a lot of Charles Manson's music? Watch Chaos, please.
Yeah. And also people might know the connection with the Beach Boys too, right? That's in there as well.
Indeed.
The Beach Boys actually recorded one of Manson's songs.
Cease to exist. Just come and say you love me.
Even though it was Manson's song, it's credited to Dennis Wilson.
Cease to resist. Come and say you love me.
Just coming back to this mind control stuff. You mentioned your film Wormwood. Why was there such an obsession around controlling the human mind at the time?
It comes out of World War II and the belief that the Nazis were involved in attempts at mind control and the sudden existence of hallucinogenic drugs and the belief that they could play some kind of role in changing minds or controlling minds. The need of the United States to prepare itself for future adversaries of one kind or another. A lot of this came out of the war in some very, very strong form. And the belief that various communist countries, China and Korea, were involved in similar explorations. Hence the term Manchurian Candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And that we had to take a defensive posture. We had to be able to do it ourselves. It's, if you like, a version of the race for more and more powerful atomic weapons. This seemed to be like a new kind of weapon that hadn't even been imagined before. Turning a person into a bomb, not carrying a bomb, but into a bomb.
Mm-hmm. And let's say Manson was part of that experimentation. Why him? Why would people be interested? Why would the CIA be interested in him?
Well, let me see if I can come up with an answer for you. He's captive commodity. He's in prison. There is considerable evidence that the CIA was using prisoners for various kinds of experimentation. And I suppose the argument goes on, well, why not Manson? Prisoners are always a great target. They're not going anywhere. They're locked up, and if there's a need to experiment on them, usually some way can be found. Why Manson specifically? Your guess is as good as mine.
All of these experiments and these government programs, you mentioned a couple of other ones in the film.
COINTELPRO was started in 1967 by the FBI. Chaos was started in 1967 by the CIA. Those two programs were designed to infiltrate left-wing groups, especially the Panthers, and neutralize them. That's what their own documents say.
What kind of impact did they have in the long term? Do you think that they helped fuel a culture of paranoia or?
Well, of course they did. It's inarguable. I mean, we live today in a deeply paranoid world, and I can just speak for myself, let alone anyone else. It's part of a whole pattern of distrust in the government, the idea that we're being manipulated, or controlled. This has become part of American politics, maybe increasingly so. Uh, was it a good thing for the CIA to have been doing? Arguably, no.
I know that they were also working to neutralize anti-war movements, for example. And I can't help but think about the targeting of dissident voices right now in the U.S. by the Trump administration. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement has been going after pro-Palestinian students. I've heard comparisons between what's going on now and the Red Scare. It's a politically charged and anxious time. And I was curious, what connections do you see between the past that's investigated in your film and present day U.S.?
Endless comparisons, unfortunately. It's hard to read about the past in America, particularly this past in America, without thinking about current affairs and the state of the country as we speak. We've embraced a kind of crazy isolationism and paranoia that is something that I don't like. I find embarrassing. Not that you need to know my individual opinion on all of this, but yeah, we have descended into kind of the anti-communist scares of the 50s all over again, except that it's not communism, it's God knows what. Wokeism?
Maybe.
Whatever that might be.
No. Does the past offer any lessons here?
Well, you're talking to someone who has a cynical bent. I often say that it's my version of Santayana, who said that those who are unfamiliar with history are condemned to repeat it. And my version of that is those who are unfamiliar with history are condemned to repeat it without a sense of ironic futility. I mean, looking at the past just reminds me that we've learned nothing from the past at all, and that we just repeat it mindlessly and endlessly.
And just on Manson in particular, do you feel like this is as close as we'll ever come to knowing exactly what happened there?
The wonderful thing about nonfiction, with fiction, you can have closure. You have a kind of confined universe. You can create it out of whole cloth. In dealing with the world is unutterably complex. I have myself been involved in all kinds of murder investigations. I've been obsessed with them over the years. And I made one movie where I solved a murder in Texas and got a man who had been sentenced to death out of prison. I got his conviction reversed, and I found the evidence that showed that his chief prosecution witness, the guy who testified against him, was the real killer.
Right. This is your film, the Thin Blue Line.
This is the
Very
Thin Blue
famous
Line.
film.
You don't get to do that every day.
When I'm asleep at night, I close my eyes, I think, why would he do it? He had no background that would lead to murder, no reason to commit a murder. I just felt they prosecuted the wrong person, and I don't know why.
And I often think of it as luck. It's luck when all of your evidence comes together. It pulls together towards some end. You may not have absolute proof, 100% certainty, but then when you're dealing with the real world, you never do. You never, ever, ever, ever do. And most investigators, I feel, should admit that somehow they can't quite put the period at the end of the sentence. They can't dot all the I's, they can't cross all the T's, that there's stuff that just slips out of their fingers. There are all these odd connections. would we like to think that it was all programmed and all rehearsed? Yeah, it's a kind of hopeful theory. But I always like to remind people that my experience of people is much closer to chaotic,
Mm-hmm.
of people acting for confused, crazy motives. And that's one of the things, that's why I would urge people to watch this. Tell me what you think. That we're plunged into the middle of something that is really puzzling. It's a really puzzling murder mystery. And I think each of us should try to come up with his own explanation of why this might have happened. Maybe MK Ultra, maybe a government program, a conspiracy, maybe just inadvertence and craziness and chaos.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a great spot to end this conversation. Errol Morris, thank you so much for this. This is great.
I hope this is helpful.
Very, very helpful and a lot of fun too. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for
Such
doing
a pleasure. Thank you.
it. Take care.
All right, everyone, that's all for today. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.